If you live in the Portland metro area, as the majority of our viewers do, and you drive a vehicle that's not brand new, you've no doubt experienced what we're talking about tonight: emissions testing. It started back in the mid-70s as a way to comply with the Clean Air Act and cut down on air pollution from cars and trucks. Back then, the Portland and Medford areas did not meet federal requirements for air quality, and that's where the testing is required to this day. Every 2 years, or when a new resident wants to register their vehicle here, you have to go to one of the special DEQ testing locations, where workers will plug a machine into your vehicle to ensure that it's not giving off too many harmful fumes. For older vehicles, they test emissions right from the tailpipe. When you pass, you pay a small fee for a certificate that allows you to register or renew registration. It costs $25 in the Portland area and $20 in the Medford area. Plenty of other states implemented similar programs, including Washington. That is until 2020, when they cut the program after 38 years. It was a planned closure. Back in 2005, the Washington state legislature set an end date based on the State Department of Ecology's calculations that the testing simply would not be needed by 2020. Mostly because newer vehicles run cleaner than those of the past and therefore give off less harmful emissions. So why is Oregon still doing it? That's what we'll take a deep dive on tonight, and you can decide whether or not you think it's still necessary. A few weeks ago, members of the Oregon DEQ met with elected officials to give an overview of the vehicle emissions program, and they highlighted that the program here is quite popular.
We measure our service delivery through a customer service survey that is provided to customers at the end of their test. I'm very pleased and proud to share that over 96% of our customers have a favorable opinion of our program and the testing process. I just want to acknowledge that for a government agency program, that is extremely impressive, especially when we are surveying customers who are regulated. In addition to our internal surveys, customers leave us online reviews on Google and other platforms. And I welcome you all to take a look at our station review sites on Google. You will find well over 1,000 reviews for each individual station, and all of them are overwhelmingly positive and supportive.
Somewhat rare to hear a government agency saying, hey, please look at our reviews. But we've also heard from some of you who don't quite feel the same way as what those reviews would say about it.
When I first heard about the Washington state getting rid of it here a few years ago, it got me thinking, well, if they're going to cancel it, and, to think that they're right in the same environmentally friendly state that we are, why are we continuing to do it? Because you're the point now, these cars, they're all run by computers and they're all passing. And that's why they got rid of it, basically. It's because if they're all passing, why are we continuing to do something that just doesn't make any sense?
We're going to bring you some of that pass-fail data in a few minutes, but let's start by comparing the programs between Washington and Oregon and the effect or not that they've had when it comes to greenhouse gases. Both states had fairly similar programs overall. They set up testing locations run by a combination of public and private employees where drivers pay a small fee to check if your car is spewing smog into our atmosphere. In Oregon, there's also DEQ2, which allows people to get their cars tested at any of the 200 local businesses registered to remotely test and send data to the DEQ. Let's look at the testing requirements in each state now. Washington's, of course, from right before the program shut down in 2020, only applied to 5 counties: Clark, King, Pierce, Snohomish, and Spokane. In Washington, cars with the model year 2009 or newer were exempt from testing, as were vehicles over 25 years old. When they cut the program, only cars within the model years of 1995 and 2008 were required to test. In Oregon, it's broader. All cars from 1975 forward are required to test, unless you have what they call a new car, a model number within the last 4 years. And in Oregon, this testing requirement applies to more than just vehicles powered by regular old gas, roping in diesel trucks, alternative fueled cars, and hybrid vehicles. All that applies to the Medford area too, but the vehicle age requirement drops to only include vehicles produced within the last 20 years that are required to test. But now let's look at how many cars actually fail emissions testing here in Oregon. In 2023, less than 4% of cars did not pass emission tests. That's roughly 21,000 failing vehicles. At the same time, well over 500,000 cars did pass. If we go back to 2014, data from the DEQ shows just over 6.5% of cars failed the test. That came out to more than 34,000 failing vehicles. So more cars failed in 2014 than in 2023. And many more vehicles overall were tested recently compared to a decade ago. So from that data, it would appear that cars are getting cleaner, which was the logic behind Washington killing its emissions testing program. But the Oregon DEQ says the low failure rate does not mean the program is useless. It shows that it's working.
Through all testing, VIP has a relatively low failure rate of 3.5% with a little over 21,000 failing tests. While that number seems low, it is actually an indicator of the success of our program in incentivizing repairs. VIP data demonstrates that without recent repairs, an additional 44,500 vehicles would fail the emissions test, which would be more than a 200% increase in the overall failure rate.
So they say the program not only shows that cars are getting cleaner, but the program incentivizes or requires the owners of older cars to maintain them enough to pass emissions requirements. If your car fails the test, you don't pay the fee, and you can test as many times as you need to pass. But when pressed about the cost of those repairs, the DEQ admits they can vary widely.
How much does it cost to make the repair on a kind of an average level to get certified? And are there situations where the repairs just can't be done feasibly? So somebody who's driving, perhaps somebody who's low income, who's driving a super old car, could this be the death knell for them, having to go to DEQ?
Through the chair, thank you, Commissioner Moynihan. That's an excellent question. We do have some programs in place to support low-income motorists who need to make repairs. I'll discuss that further on in our presentation to give them a little bit more detail. But the reality is emissions repairs could vary. They can range anywhere from a simple fix, that costs maybe a few $100s to thousands of dollars to even maybe, as you alluded to, considering retiring the vehicle or removing it from Oregon fleet and no longer driving it.
The DEQ worked to build their case for the program by pointing to a recent study that measured tailpipe emissions from cars driving on the road. The DEQ contracted with a company called Opus. They use tech to improve road safety and reduce emissions. They created a study that put these boxes, called remote sensing devices or RSDs, on freeways on-ramps. They capture and measure emissions from engines while in use, as well as capturing the car's license plate to determine whether the vehicle is registered within the vehicle testing boundaries. And here's what they found.
As you can see in the graph, vehicles not required to test emitted almost twice as much carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides compared to tested vehicles, and also saw an increase in hydrocarbon emissions and therefore air toxics.
That team says they're planning a series of similar tests over the next decade. But now to the big question, how much does this testing program cost you, the Oregon taxpayer? Well, it's more or less self-sufficient. Every biennium, the Oregon legislature allocates a certain amount of money that the emissions testing program is allowed to spend. They call it the legislative adopted budget. But that's not the amount of money they give to the program. It generates revenue through that $20 to $25 fee you pay every 2 years to get the test done. And generally, that revenue covers the program costs. Here's the breakdown from the last decade. As you can see, from roughly 2015 through 2019 in this graph, the program was actually in the red, spending more than it was taking in. However, starting in the 2019 to 2021 biennium, the program started bringing in more than it was spending. That includes this biennium so far, which goes up to June of this year, where so far they've pulled in around $100,000 more than they've spent. Some of that cost goes towards paying the roughly 100 full-time workers who test vehicles. The rest goes towards maintaining and running the program and its equipment and paying rent on the buildings where testing is done. So it kind of acts as a perpetual motion machine, funding itself off the fees it charges drivers without additional cash from the state. Now, there was an effort during last year's legislative session to kill Oregon's emissions testing program, but the idea barely got off the ground. There were early documents, never an actual bill. So what is your take on Oregon's emissions testing program? Do you think it should stick around, or should we go the way of Washington and get rid of it? Let us know. Email thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We're going to feature some of your thoughts on tomorrow night's show.